You're listening to School Counseling Simplified, a podcast with easy-to-implement strategies for busy school counselors. Here's your host, Rachel Davis from Bright Futures Counseling.
I get asked all the time what to do. New counselors say, what am I supposed to be doing? What am I supposed to plan next? How do I run this group? How do I teach this lesson? And I know how you feel. I mean, this profession doesn't really come with an instruction manual, and we definitely didn't learn all of this in grad school. So over the years, I've developed curriculum plans and resources to support students, and those are the things that you'll see, in my TPT store and on my blog, and that's how I'd love serving you guys. But I decided I needed something more too. I wanted to really support you guys more and build an awesome community. So that's why I created Impact, my school counselor membership program. So each month, our members receive monthly curriculum plans, ready-to-download resources, and video implementation guides. So they have everything they need to best support students and to make their counseling lives just a little bit easier. In addition, I deliver quarterly live professional development trainings. We have a fun and active Facebook group where we all hang out and collaborate and do fun giveaways and challenges. An essential resource library full of resources that you may need all year long, like a grief group or divorce discussion cards. And the best part, our community live chats. So we do Facebook Live and Zoom calls every month where we all get together, kind of like a round table, troubleshoot tough cases, pick each other's brains. It's a lot of fun. So if this sounds like something you need or something you're interested in, send me a message on Instagram at Bright Futures Counseling or head over to stressfreeschoolcounseling.com/impact. Okay, let's go to the show. Hey there, thanks for listening to another episode of School Counseling Simplified. So today I want to share with you guys my all-time favorite school counseling data tracking tool, and that is the end of the year report. Now, I maybe said that my favorite tool earlier was the behavior surveys, but this is seriously it, I promise. I also apologize if you're hearing some background noise. That is my toddler son. It is a rainy season in Costa Rica. Well, it doesn't get really rainy till the fall, but we got a little bit of rain, like our first big rain in months, and all the little critters are coming out, and they just saw a snake. So if I scream or have to pause, maybe there is a snake in here. But that's the life of living in Costa Rica, right? Pura vida. Okay, so anyways, like I said, end of the year report. I love this thing. I've talked about it ad nauseum, I'm sure, but if you're new around here and haven't heard me talk about it, you're going to love it. Even if you had heard me talk about it in the past, I encourage you to stick around and check it out. This episode, I'm doing a deep dive on how you can make your own, how you can use it, why it's beneficial. Now, this episode, I've actually pulled pieces from my recent video series I did. So a couple weeks ago, you guys probably heard me talking about my free video series where I was talking about data tools, and it was all about the end of the year report. So if you did attend the training, then this will be a little repetitive. If you did not attend the video series training, no worries, it's over now. We'll do something similar in the future, I'm sure. I'm always doing free trainings and such. But if you did miss it, then you definitely don't want to miss this episode, because I am actually using the recording from the training where I do a deep dive all about the end of the year report. Okay, let's listen. I'm going to show you how you can transform your counseling program by using data collection tools. This way you can better serve your students and advocate for your role. It's a win-win, right? So like I said, we're starting with the ins and outs of my favorite data tracking tool. And my all-time favorite data tracking tool is an end of the year report. So what is an end of the year report? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's a report you create at the end of the year to show how many students you served, how many class lessons you taught, and even how much time you spent with students. Now, let's take a deeper look at what's inside of an end of the year report. So here are some must-have stats that I like to include in mine. I like to include the number of students that I've served. So I break this down into individual and small groups. So how many students have you seen across how many small groups? How many students have you seen individually? And these are those reoccurring student sessions I'm referring to. And then how much time you spent with those students. So what's the average minutes per session and over how many weeks? Once you do this math, you will be very surprised and proud. Then the class guidance lesson topics that you covered and how frequently you taught them. So were you going in every class once a month, every other week, and which topics did you cover? I also like to include character education, school-wide activities that I host or implement. So perhaps you're doing like a big initiative for Bullying Prevention Month, or you did a fundraiser for something, any of that information as well. And let's give yourself some credit for all those hours you spent at PD, conferences, or trainings that you attended or presented at. and all of those IEP, SST meetings that you attended, parent meetings. If you can go back on your calendar, find these and add up those minutes, include those hours in there, that's some really powerful data. It'll really show your admin where you're spending your time. Now, data collection sources. So you may be thinking, where am I going to find this data? Well, you can use student self-assessments. You can also add this. So this would be pre and post surveys that students are answering before or after a group or individual sessions. Teacher and parent feedback that you're receiving, so perhaps through behavior surveys you're sending out. Observations, just based on your own observations of watching students and seeing how they've implemented the strategies you've taught them. Pre and post group surveys, like I mentioned, and progress monitoring scales. So here is a shot of what it looks like in action. So it starts off with just a snippet about what the report is, who you are, and what school year it is. So you can say, hey, this report's summarizing the findings from the school counselor during this school year. This is my role. This is what I do with students, and I support our school's mission statement by this. And then I like to do a school at a glance section. So in here you can include like your school website, a photo of your school, the grade levels, enrollment numbers, school year, principal, counselor. And then the report gets, as you can see on the next page, like a little more detailed, but I like to have a fun pop-out numbers section here in the front. So I love to include some counseling by the numbers stats. So these are just like fun stats you can grab, like how many students that you saw in your weekly schedule, or how many students you saw individually, the number of small groups that you offered, the number of class lessons that you did, the number of students you served who had IEPs, just some standout stats. Then I like to break it down into individual and group counseling. So individual counseling, I talk about why students would be receiving individual counseling, and then the number of students that I saw individually, the average number of sessions per student, and then the average time spent per student. And then I like to do like a percentage of the students seen individually. So if this is an easy stat to get, for example, if you are seeing 10 students and you're seeing 4 individually and 6 students in the group, then 40% of your students would be seen individually. I also like to include referral data, like where those referrals are coming from. So, are they coming from parents, teachers, principals, student self-referrals, from the counselor, from other? And then small group counseling, same thing. I talk about how students are selected for small groups, kind of what we go over in small groups, the length and duration of a small group, number of students in the group, the total number of the groups that I ran, and then the percentage, again, of the students I saw in group counseling, along with that referral data. Then I have a section for class guidance lessons. So I talk about, when I offered the lessons, the topics that were covered, and who received those lessons. And then I like to include professional development. So, list in there any conferences that you attended, any trainings. These could be things you did on your own or that your school provided. This is all really important information. You could also track the hours that you spent in each one. And then I make this chart over here for my groups. So it's just, I'm a visual person, and perhaps the reader of the report will be also. So I like to include the group name, the topic it covered, grade levels covered, number of sessions, time spent in the group, and number of students in that group. Then I have an area for additional services provided. So here, that's where I like to talk about, character ed. So maybe we did like a buddy bench one year where we set up this bench where the kids would come at recess if they were feeling lonely, and then other kids would join them. We did like a big, drug prevention awareness initiative. Any fundraisers that you do, anything like that you're organizing, give yourself a shout out there. Maybe you're doing like student ambassadors, bullying prevention run. And then meetings. So don't discount these meetings. They take up a lot of your time. And this data is so important because you want your principal to see where your time is being spent. And the more time you're spending in meetings, the less time you're spending helping students, right? So while some meetings are necessary, it is nice to bring attention to exactly how many you're going to. So I like to put the number of meetings that I've attended and the approximate time spent. And then over here you have a spot to include some graphs. So you could get these graphs by using like Google Forms to your self-assessments or your behavior surveys. And so these would be student responses before and after services provided. So for example, I know what to say when I meet someone new. 33% of students said yes, and then 66% of students said no. So then maybe after your services, you would have another graph to compare it to with the same question that would say, maybe they improved. Now maybe 2 out of 3 students can say yes. And here's another shot of what it looks like in action, once it's all printed out. and it looks nice. So like I said, I like to provide like a template so then you can then customize it to fit your needs. And you can add, perhaps you're doing initiatives or, focusing on things in your program that I didn't mention here. You can totally add and take away as needed. So here's some tips for creating your end of the year report. Include data from services provided. So there's two things I want you to think about here, and I both start with SP. I love a good memory thing. So include data from services provided, and then include data from student progress. So services provided, that's going to be things like the number of students that you saw, the number of lessons that you taught, the number of small groups that you ran, right? So those are the services that you provided. The second piece is that student progress data. Now that's where you're showing graphs or charts to demonstrate how students have changed since they started counseling services. So that's where you're going to use those self-assessments or those behavior surveys or those observations to document this is how the student was doing before I provided services and this is how they're doing now. That's how the student has progressed. So you may be thinking, well, this looks cool, but it kind of seems like a lot of work. Like, why should I create this? Well, I cannot wait to tell you why. It's a great way to reflect on your program's progress and to feel proud of all of your hard work. You can interpret the data to modify your program. So once you see, you can find out deficits. You can see results from a self-assessment and say, wow, none of the students got the third question right, even after we had a whole session on that. How could I be teaching this differently? You can then modify your program to best fit those students' needs. You can showcase the data to advocate for your role. So like I said, advocate for yourself using those minutes that you're spent in meetings. You can show your admin like, hey, I'm spending a lot of time, sitting in on these IEP meetings. They're really long. Could I just come for a portion of the meeting where I can talk about, how I'm helping the student with counseling? Instead, I would use those minutes to run more small groups or whatever. You can also use this data to advocate for your role by showing the impact that the school counseling program has at your school, right? Unfortunately, a lot of the time, admin are kind of clueless on what we're up to. They're like, oh, she's in her office over there doing some calm down corner stuff, I think. But you can say, I did this, I did this, I did this. That can help you secure more funding, secure more positions. Perhaps you're going to hire new counselors, expand your team. It's really powerful to showcase that data. And it helps you communicate your program's effectiveness. So you may know, oh, I'm making great gains with this student. Or, wow, that small group really helped those kiddos. But if you don't have any data to show for it, no one else will see the results. So an end of the year report is a great way to communicate how your program is effective and how it is helping students. Creating an end of the year report allows you to know exactly what your program needs and increases the value for your position. This makes you feel prepared and confident to best serve your students. So I'm going to share with you today how you can interpret that data to improve your counseling program. And you can do that by analyzing your end of the year report. So now that you've collected all the data for your end of the year report, we're going to think about how we can use this, right? How can we help impact more students? Well, by collecting data to assess student needs, we can see what's working well and what's not. We can then modify our counseling program to best serve all students. Now you may be thinking, ooh, I don't want to know, what if something's not working? But you do want to know. Any data is powerful data. Even if you get self-assessments back and all the kids are doing worse than they were from before you started, that's still powerful data to have because we can then tweak our program to best serve student needs. If we don't know, we would just keep doing the same thing over and over again. I think there's an Einstein quote that says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again that doesn't get results. I don't know, I feel like I butchered that, but you know what I mean, right? So you got to change how you're doing things to get better results. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I have the data, now what? Well, number one, if your data shows that the student has improved, celebrate. So if you look at a self-assessment and you say, wow, before this, the student did not know how to identify any coping strategies. Now they can identify 3 coping strategies. That's awesome. Take a moment to celebrate that your intervention worked and to celebrate your student's progress with the student. You can always review their results and say, wow, look how far you've come. You can then transition them to a lower tier of intervention. So I want you to think about the pyramid here, right? We have our 3 tiers. We have a tier 1, the class lessons, tier 2, the small groups, and tier 1, individual counseling. And these are more intensive, right? So students are moving up through the tiers. So if you're seeing a student in, individual counseling, and based on their data, you can see that they've improved a lot, they don't need individual counseling anymore. Perhaps you can move them down just to a group. Maybe they'll spend some time in a group, and then eventually they'll go back to just getting that school-wide preventative intervention via class lessons. Now, or if you're seeing a student in a group and you find out that they've improved a lot, you can move them down just so they're back at that class lesson level. The second thing is, let's say the data shows that the student has not improved. Again, this is okay. You can reevaluate, refer out, move them up a tier, or refine the curriculum. So reevaluate, refer, and refine, and then move them up a tier. I wish that one was an R. But reevaluate. So figure out, what's not working. Is this more on the student, or is this more on me? Is this student, just like not trying, or they're not showing up for their sessions, or is that why we feel like they didn't improve? Or maybe am I not explaining this in their learning style? Is there a better way that I can teach this to fit their needs? Refer out. If you're seeing the student at the tier 3 level and they're still not showing progress, perhaps it's time to talk to parents, if they've considered any outside counseling, or if you can get some support in another way. Move up a tier. So alternatively to what I was saying before, if you're seeing the student in a small group and you notice that they're not really showing any progress, maybe they need more than the small group can offer. Maybe they need that individual level of support, and you could move them up a tier. And then refine the curriculum. So as I mentioned before, maybe you need to tweak things. You create something and then you figure out, oh gosh, in my small group, session number 3, we talked about how to identify coping strategies, and based on the self-assessment results, none of the students can name a coping strategy. Maybe I need to refine this curriculum. Maybe I need to figure out, a new activity we can do so they can remember them, or how we can do charades to act them out so they can practice using these coping skills so they could remember them. So I want to know, how do you think an end-of-the-year report would best help you? So I want you to think about this. Do you think it would help you determine when to end services? So a lot of times, we're guilty of these like ongoing services, especially with individuals. Like, oh gosh, they just come to my office every week for the whole school year. But that's not right, is it? It's better to have a short-term solution-focused program. So we want to say, okay, I'm going to see the student for 6 to 8 weeks. At the end of our sessions, we're going to, look at the data and then determine next best steps. We don't want these ongoing counseling sessions. We need to make sure that what we're doing is effective. Or number 2, would it help you figure out which groups to lead? Maybe you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing with students, but you can say, wow, well, based off my individual counseling data, I'm seeing that a few of these kids with similar issues have improved, but could still, use a little more social skills support. That's how you can figure out maybe you need a social skills group. Or 3, know when to refer to an outside agency. So I know a lot of times, you're like, I don't know, I feel like I should just keep helping them here at school. I feel like I'm inadequate if they're not improving. But that's not the case. It doesn't speak to you. If you've refined the curriculum, you've collected the data, perhaps the best way to support your student is to, in fact, refer out to an outside agency. How can we showcase our data to advocate for our position? Well, you do this by displaying your amazing results. Advocating for your position can help you get the recognition that you deserve as a school counselor. And the end of the year report is the ultimate self-advocating tool. This is a chance for you to brag on yourself and show the need for your program. So a lot of times people don't really know what the counselor does. There's a lot of confusion around the role of the counselor. Maybe they're mistaking you for another position on campus, or they just don't really know what you're up to. And clarity brings purpose. So the more clear we can be about who we are and what we offer and how we help students, the more purposeful our school counseling program can be. So there's a couple ways you can do this. First, you can use that end of the year report we talked about earlier in video 1 to communicate the services that you provided. You want to be sure to touch on these points. How did you provide direct services with students? So I want you to think about small groups that you provided, individual counseling sessions that you provided, class counseling lessons that you provided. How you supported teachers. So, did you support teachers? Maybe you trained them on a lesson that they could then train their students on. Did you help assist with behavior plans? Did you meet with teachers to, discuss student concerns? How have you supported parents? Again, these are more meetings. Or perhaps you did like a parent education workshop. Perhaps you do a weekly newsletter and the time that you put together for that to educate parents. And how have you collaborated with the community? So did you help your students do a community service project? Have you hosted a career fair with local community members? How have you, assisted the community as well? Those are all ways that you provided services to students and their families. But then also we want to talk about student progress. So I mentioned both of these before, the SPs, services provided and student progress, in the last video. So be sure to watch that one if you missed it. But you want to be sure to touch on these points. Self-assessment data. So self-assessments are so simple to put together. It's essentially just a list of questions, a list of statements that students are going to respond yes or no to. And I like to choose these statements based on the objectives. So for example, if you're seeing students for social skills, and in session 1, you're going to talk about how to start a conversation, okay, with someone new. Then on your self-assessment section, the first statement would say, I know how to start a conversation with someone new, yes or no. So that statement and their response is directly correlated to what you covered, the objective, in session 1. Or perhaps you're doing a session, maybe you have a self-regulation group, and one of your sessions is about coping strategies. And the question or statement could say, I can name 3 coping strategies, yes or no. Or you have them write their coping strategies. So these are self-assessments. So they would answer this as a pre-test before services are provided, and as a post-test at the conclusion of your services. So then you can see how students improved. So you can see how the student improved based on the information you provided. Last week, yesterday I talked to you about how this kind of, brings out those deficits, and you could see where maybe you need to tweak something, or perhaps it's not your error, but the student just didn't understand. The second data tool that I love is a good old behavior survey, or a behavior progress monitoring form. So these, instead of sending to students, you would send to parents and teachers, and you would kind of get a glimpse on how the student is behaving at home and in the classroom. So they would say questions like, student knows how to calm down appropriately. Student knows how to request for help when needed. Student knows how to make new friends. Student knows how to make a conversation. And then they would answer on a scale, a Likert scale, of rarely, sometimes, often, almost always. Or never, rarely, often, sometimes, almost always. And they would circle those, and then you would send the same thing at the end, and you could see, did the behavior improve? Now, I love these because it's really cool to contrast the differences between home and school. So perhaps at home they're showing a lot of improvement, but at school they're not. Or perhaps at school the teacher is seeing a certain type of behavior, but at home they're seeing a completely different behavior. So that's always really interesting to see. And then I love to compare it with the student self-reflection through the self-assessment. So it really gives us a comprehensive picture, and you can then add even one more piece to the puzzle, and that's your own observations of working with the student. So again, those behavior progress monitoring data or parent-teacher feedback surveys, super helpful. And attendance data. So, it's always good to see how students' attendance has changed. So perhaps this is an initiative you're working on, is to increase student attendance, and have your services impacted that. Have your services, perhaps the student was missing a lot of school due to some bullying, and you did a bullying prevention group or individual sessions, and now that you're seeing that the student is coming to school more often. So you can also showcase that attendance data. These are all pieces of data that we want to include. We want to show this to our admin. We want to say, look how the student improved from the start of our sessions. Look how the parents think the student has improved. Look how the teacher thinks the students have improved. Look how their attendance has improved since they started sessions with us. So I want you to think about, as you're reflecting on this, what data are you most proud of? Are you most proud of the groups that you've led, the number of small groups that you did this year? Or the class lessons that you taught? Are you proud of the class lessons that you taught? Or are you most proud of the trainings that you've attended? Perhaps you've done a lot of trainings, or you've done a lot of, parent meetings, and you've put in that work. Are you most proud of that data? Or you may be thinking, I don't know, I'm proud, but I feel a little weird like bragging on myself. It seems pretty like self-promotional, especially if you're the only counselor at your school site. But no worries, you can use this as a tool to advocate for your program. You're bringing awareness to what the school counseling program can provide, what you offer to students, and how it makes such a difference in your students and in your community as a whole. And you're bringing awareness to your profession. This is what the school counselor does, and this is how powerful our profession is. Again, this can help you secure more funding, get new positions. Perhaps your program needs to expand. I'm sure all of you would love a co-counselor or a little more support, am I right? So that is my third tip for you guys, how you can showcase data to advocate for your position. But before we go, I want to share a personal story. So my first year counseling, I decided I was going to make an end of the year report. And that's how I came up with the template I currently use and teach others about now. But I was kind of, piecemealing mine together by looking at different things online. And I came up, with my report, and I was like, well, this is kind of cool. It was really more for me. It was just really neat to see all that I did and kind of to help me communicate, all the services that I provided. Because I had on my Google Calendar, written when I would see kids and for how long. And then I had like a caseload spreadsheet, but it all wasn't really together or cohesive. So it was nice to kind of have it all in one spot. And then I decided to send a copy to my principal. Now, my principal absolutely loved it. It was a big surprise because, again, it was unprompted. And they were like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. They then forwarded it to my superintendent, who then reached out to me. She specifically sent me an email telling me that she so appreciated this. That was huge for me, guys. The superintendent reached out to me, first year little counselor over here, telling me that she really loved my report and how much it showed what the counseling program is providing. From then on, our entire counseling team at all the school sites in our district would do an end of the year report every year. So hopefully they didn't hate me too much for making them do one too. But I think everyone loved it because it was just a cool way to really put some numbers and some value behind what we're doing, because so often it feels like a thankless position, or that what you're doing is going unnoticed, or maybe you're noticing it, but you don't know if anyone else is. So this is a really cool way to communicate it. And no one can argue with the facts, right? No one can argue with the cold, hard data. This is proof that what you're doing is working and of your program's effectiveness and the need for your position and the value of your counseling program. Now, I don't share that story to brag on myself. I just share it to talk about the powerfulness and effectiveness of this end of the year report and how I really encourage you guys to do something like this at your own school site. I hope you guys found that training super helpful. I have an end of the year report template. If you're interested in that, you can totally make your own and DIY it. But if you'd rather have a template to go off of, then I have one for you. And it's completely editable, PowerPoint and Google Slides. I'll attach the link to that in the show notes, as well as a link to a blog post that I have if you're more of a reader than an auditory learner. And I list out examples and write all about how you can make your own end of the year report. Okay, guys, I'll talk to you next week.
Thanks for listening to School Counseling Simplified. You can find the links from today's episode in the show notes. If you'd like to connect with Rachel, she's on Instagram and Teachers Pay Teachers at Bright Futures Counseling. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any episodes of School Counseling Simplified. Talk to you next week.